I never understood how someone could cancel a wedding or not attend at the last minute. Weddings aren't impulse decisions. You don't wake up one day and decide to get married. It's something you plan for, think through, commit to. But I was wrong. You may not come to the wedding. And sometimes you have no other choice. That's exactly what happened to me. 2 weeks before I was supposed to walk down the aisle, I found out my fiancé had been lying to me. Not just any lie, the cheating. The kind that rips the ground out from under you. The kind that makes you question everything. And what did I do? I didn't yell. I didn't fight. I didn't call off the wedding. Instead, I planned something she'd remember for the rest of her life. Then, when the moment was right, I disappeared. Forever. My name's Jake Turner, and up until 2 weeks before my wedding, I thought I had everything figured out. I'm 32, born and raised in Dallas, Texas. I worked as a project manager for Caldwell & Rowe, one of the biggest commercial construction firms in the state. We weren't building houses or strip malls, we built the skyline. High-rises, stadiums, multi-million-dollar developments. If you've been to Dallas, you've seen our work. I wasn't just doing well, I was thriving. I had a six-figure salary, a company-issued Ford F-150 Raptor, a downtown office with floor-to-ceiling windows, and a reputation for getting things done. My job was fast-paced, competitive, and stressful, but I liked it that way. I knew where my life was headed. And then I met Laura Whitmore. She was the kind of woman you didn't just notice, you felt her presence before she even spoke. We met at the Tipsy Oak, a bar in Fort Worth, during my buddy Trevor's engagement party. She walked in like she owned the place, blonde hair perfectly curled, green eyes sharp, heels clicking against the wooden floor like she had somewhere important to be. I remember nudging Trevor. "Who's that?" "She sells luxury real estate," he said. "Highland Park. $1 million homes." Laura was the kind of woman who made a man want to step up his game. She was confident, smart, charming, the type that could sell a penthouse to a guy who came in looking for a one-bedroom. She had that kind of talent, and she knew how to make you feel like you were the most important person in the room. That night, we talked for hours. She laughed at my dumb jokes, asked about my work like she actually cared, made me feel like I was someone worth knowing. By the end of the night, I was hooked. We dated for a year before I popped the question. I did it right. Nick and Sam's Steakhouse, private booth, a Cartier solitaire ring I had to special order from New York. I'd never spent that much money on something so small before, but for her, it was worth it. She cried when she saw it, said yes before I even finished my speech, kissed me like I was her whole world. And just like that, my future was set. For the next 12 months, it was all about wedding planning. I didn't care much for the details, so I let her take charge. She picked the venue, the Dallas Arboretum. Classy, expensive, exactly the kind of place she wanted. The guest list was packed, real estate agents, developers, people from her world. I wrote the checks and stayed out of the way. Everything was going according to plan. Then, 2 weeks before the big day, I found the receipt. It was a normal night. I'd just gotten home from work, still wearing my Caldwell & Rowe Company polo, kicking off my boots when I decided to grab a beer. I pulled open the fridge, reached for a Shiner Bock, and that's when I saw it. A crumpled receipt, half hidden under a pack of takeout napkins. I almost didn't think anything of it. Laura wasn't careless. She wasn't the type to leave things lying around. But something about it caught my eye. I picked it up. The Capitol Grill, Uptown Dallas. Date, last Thursday. Paid in cash. 2 entrees. 2 glasses of Cabernet Sauvignon. 1 dessert. Laura had told me she was at her mom's house in Plano that night. My stomach twisted in a way that didn't feel right. I told myself it wasn't what it looked like. Maybe she met a client. Maybe she went with a friend. Maybe. I wanted to believe that. But I knew better. Something inside me, the part that handled million-dollar contracts and saw through shady deals, told me the truth. I needed to find out. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm. The receipt sat on my nightstand, right next to my watch and wallet. I must have taken it out of my pocket before bed, but I didn't remember doing it. That's how much it was messing with my head. I grabbed it, smoothing it out against my palm. The Capitol Grill. 2 entrees. 2 glasses of wine. 1 dessert. I stared at it for a long time, turning over every excuse in my head. Maybe it wasn't hers. Maybe her mom had dinner there, and Laura picked up the receipt by mistake. Maybe she really had been at her mom's, and the receipt was some random fluke. But I knew that wasn't true. Laura never paid in cash. She used her Amex Platinum for everything: groceries, coffee, even parking meters. And there was no way her mom was sitting in a dimly lit steakhouse in Uptown, drinking Cabernet Sauvignon with some mystery guest. No, this was Laura's. And that meant she'd lied to me. I got dressed like I always did, dark-washed jeans, Caldwell and Roe polo boots. Made coffee, skipped breakfast, and drove to work. I walked into the office, dropped my truck keys on my desk, and tried to focus. I couldn't. By noon, I gave up pretending. I walked over to my assistant's desk. Maya Morales, 27, sharp as a knife, handled half my life without breaking a sweat. I need to take off early, I told her. She raised an eyebrow. You, taking off early? That's a first. Personal stuff, I said. Maya shrugged. All right. Just don't forget about the site meeting with the architects tomorrow. I nodded, grabbed my keys, and walked out of the office. I parked my black F-150 Raptor 2 blocks away from Laura's office on McKinney Avenue, just out of sight. It was 4:45 p.m. Laura got off work at 5:30. I had nothing to do but wait, so I leaned back in my seat, watching the world move around me. McKinney Avenue was always packed at this hour. The sidewalks were full of office workers and tourists, spilling out of coffee shops and restaurants. Streetcars rumbled by, stopping to let people on and off. A few guys in suits smoked cigars outside a whiskey bar, their laughter cutting through the noise of traffic. I kept my eyes on the front doors of Whitmore and Clarkson Realty. At 5:37 p.m., she walked out. Laura looked like she was headed somewhere important. Fitted white dress, red-bottom Louboutins, hair in soft waves. Not her usual office look. She always dressed well, but this was different. This was intentional. She wasn't going home. She walked straight to her white Range Rover Velar, unlocked it, and slid inside. I gripped the steering wheel as her taillights flicked on. I gave her a 30-second head start before pulling onto the street. Laura drove south, past Victory Park, merging into the flow of downtown traffic. The sky had that golden glow, the sun dipping just behind the skyline, making the glass buildings look like they were on fire. She didn't head toward Plano, where her mom lived. She didn't head home, either. She kept going. She crossed into Deep Ellum, turning onto Elm Street, where neon lights flickered to life above bars and restaurants. The area was packed, people spilling onto patios, live music drifting from open doors, couples laughing as they walked hand in hand. But Laura wasn't here for drinks or music. She took a sharp left onto a quieter street. I slowed down, hanging back as she pulled into a valet lane. The Kimpton Pittman Hotel. A high-end boutique hotel. Not a place she'd be meeting clients. My hands tightened on the wheel as I watched her step out of her car. She didn't rush inside. Didn't look nervous. She checked her phone, swiped the screen, and smiled. Like she was waiting for someone. At 5:51 p.m., he arrived. Black BMW M5. Clean. Expensive. Windows tinted just enough to be legal. The driver's door opened, and he stepped out. Tall. Dark hair. Custom-tailored navy suit. He looked like the kind of guy you'd see in the financial district, the kind that played golf on Fridays and drank Macallan 18 like it was water. Laura walked up to him, and he kissed her. Not a quick kiss. Not a polite peck. A real kiss. Familiar. Like they'd done it 100 times before. Like I didn't exist. I felt my heartbeat in my throat. My whole body locked up, every muscle wound tight. But I didn't move. I didn't throw my truck into park. Didn't jump out. Didn't shout her name across the street. I just sat there. Because in that moment, everything changed. I'd spent the last year planning a life with this woman. Writing checks for caterers, florists, a wedding planner. Listening to her talk about seating charts and honeymoon destinations. Smiling like a fool every time she called me her fiancée. And the whole time, she was doing this behind my back. I exhaled slowly, forcing my grip to loosen on the wheel. This wasn't the time to lose my temper. I needed to be smart. I sat in my truck outside the hotel for a long time, gripping the wheel so hard. I watched Laura disappear inside with him. My fiancée. The woman I was supposed to marry in 2 weeks. I wasn't even angry. Not yet. I was cold, clear-headed, and I knew exactly what I needed to do. I needed proof. I needed Callahan. His office was in Arlington, tucked between a pawn shop and a Taco Bueno. No sign. No receptionist. Just a metal door with a faded sticker that said Callahan Investigations and a buzzer that barely worked. I knocked twice and walked in. The smell hit me first, stale coffee, old paper, and cigarette smoke. The AC was going full blast, but it didn't do much to cut through the thick Texas heat rolling in from the open blinds. And there he was, a Callahan. Just Callahan. No first name. No small talk. Ex-cop, maybe late 50s, skin tanned from years of working cases in the sun. He wore a leather jacket, despite it being 95 degrees outside, and had a half-smoked Marlboro Red dangling between his fingers. "You're early," he said, flicking ashes into a styrofoam cup that was half full of burnt coffee. "I didn't make an appointment." Callahan leaned back in his chair, studying me. His office was a mess, stacks of case files, a dusty fan rattling in the corner, a single landline phone that looked like it had survived the 1980s. A dented filing cabinet sat against the wall, next to an ashtray overflowing with cigarette butts. I knew guys like Callahan. The kind who'd seen it all. The kind who didn't ask questions unless they had to. "You sure you want to know?" he asked, his voice rough like gravel. I nodded. Callahan stubbed out his cigarette, pulled open a desk drawer, and grabbed a legal pad. "All right, let's hear it. What's her name?" "Laura Whitmore." "Fiancée?" "For now." He grunted, flipping a page. "You got reason to suspect her?" I exhaled slowly, resting my elbows on the desk. "She told me she was at her mom's last Thursday. I found a receipt from the Capitol Grill, 2 entrees, 2 glasses of wine, paid in cash." Callahan scribbled something down. "Anything else?" I stared at the nicotine stains on his fingers. "Followed her yesterday. She drove to the Kimpton Pittman Hotel in Deep Ellum. Met a guy. Black BMW M5. Tall, dark hair. They kissed. That was the first time I'd said it out loud." Callahan didn't react. He just nodded, flipping the legal pad shut. "Got a picture of him?" I pulled out my phone and slid it across the desk. The photo was grainy, taken through my windshield, but it was enough. Callahan studied it for a few seconds, then handed it back. "Give me a week," he said. 7 days later, I walked back into Callahan's office. This time, he didn't say anything, just reached into his desk drawer, pulled out a manila folder, and tossed it onto the desk. I stared at it for a long time before picking it up. Inside, pictures. Laura and Mr. BMW. Hotel check-ins. Late-night dinners. Parking lot meetups. All time-stamped. "She's got a routine," Callahan said, lighting another cigarette. "Drive straight from work to meet him. Sometimes it's a restaurant. Sometimes it's a hotel. Same guy, every time." I clenched my jaw so tight my teeth hurt. Callahan flipped open a second folder. "Figured you'd want to know who he is." I looked down. Name, Ethan Carter. Occupation, hedge fund manager. Office, Carter and Dunn Capital, Uptown Dallas. Residence, high-rise condo on Turtle Creek Boulevard. Of course, a finance guy. The kind who probably spent his weekends on golf courses, talking about market trends and investment opportunities. The kind who had too much money and no sense of loyalty. I felt my fingers dig into the folder. "She's been seeing this guy for about 4 months, Callahan said, taking a drag from his cigarette. 4 months. That meant while we were touring wedding venues, she was meeting him at hotels. That meant while I was paying for her dream wedding, she was having dinner with him. That meant while I was promising her a future, she was throwing it all away. She's not even careful," Callahan added. "Women like that? They don't stop." I shut the folder. My chest felt like it had a concrete block sitting on top of it. I stood up. "How much do I owe you?" Callahan waved a hand. "This one's on me, kid." I frowned. "Why?" He smirked, flicking his cigarette ash into the styrofoam cup. "Because I like seeing a man wake up." I nodded. Then I walked out the door. I sat in my truck for over an hour, gripping the steering wheel, staring at the manila folder Callahan had given me. The evidence was all there. Laura Whitmore, my fiancée, had been meeting another man for 4 months. A hedge fund manager. A guy with a black BMW M5 and a high-rise condo in Uptown Dallas. While I was picking out wedding invitations, she was having steak dinners with him. While I was booking the honeymoon, she was checking into hotels. While I was building a future, she was burning it to the ground. I wasn't going to marry her. That was clear. But walking away quietly? No. She had humiliated me. So, I was going to return the favor. I drove home to our apartment in University Park, where everything was exactly as I had left it. Laura wasn't home. She was at a bridal fitting in Highland Park Village, probably sipping champagne with her bridesmaids, talking about the wedding like nothing was wrong. I walked inside and sat at the kitchen counter, staring at the marble surface. There were things I should have been feeling: anger, heartbreak, betrayal. But all I felt was focused. I needed a plan, not a messy confrontation, not some emotional blow-up. Something clean, something she'd never forget. something that would stick with her for the rest of her life. I grabbed a pen and paper from the desk in the living room and started writing. Laura, I know everything. Enjoy the wedding. I won't be there. That was it. No long explanations. No accusations. No begging for answers. Just the truth. I folded the note, slid it into a plain white envelope, and sealed it shut. I ran my fingers over the flap, imagining the moment she'd open it, at the altar, in front of 200 guests, her family, her friends. I imagined the look on her face, the way the air would get sucked out of the room. It was perfect. I wasn't just walking away. I was leaving a crater. The next day, I drove to my brother's house in Frisco. Matt Turner, older than me by 3 years, married, 2 kids. One of them was Tommy, my 7-year-old nephew. Tommy was supposed to be the ring bearer at my wedding. He had been practicing his walk, proud as anything, talking about how he was going to carry the little white pillow down the aisle. I pulled into Matt's driveway and cut the engine. He was outside working on his Chevy Silverado, wiping grease off his hands when he saw me step out of my truck. Hey, he called, tossing the rag onto the workbench. Didn't know you were stopping by. I walked up, hands in my pockets. Got a favor to ask? Matt raised an eyebrow. What kind of favor? I pulled out the envelope and held it up. I need Tommy to deliver this at the wedding. Matt wiped his hands on his jeans and gave me a look. What is it? Something for Laura. She'll know when she sees it. He frowned, sensing something was off. Jake, what's going on? I exhaled, staring at the ground. I could have told him everything. I could have shown him the folder, the pictures, let him share in my anger. But I didn't. Because this wasn't about getting sympathy. It was about finishing this the right way. Just trust me, I said. Can you do this or not? Matt studied me for a long moment, then finally nodded. Yeah, I can do that. I crouched down, calling over Tommy, who was kicking a soccer ball around the yard. Hey, buddy, I said as he ran up. I need your help with something really important. His face lit up. Like a mission? Exactly like a mission. I handed him the envelope. At the wedding, instead of carrying the rings, I need you to walk this up to the priest. Tommy nodded, serious as ever. I can do that. I ruffled his hair. That's my guy. He ran off, kicking his soccer ball, and I stood up, locking eyes with Matt. You sure about this? Matt asked. I nodded. Yeah, I'm sure. And with that, I turned, got back in my truck, and drove away. That night, I packed. Not just a suitcase. Everything. I pulled out a duffel bag, filled it with clothes, shoes, and whatever else I needed. I grabbed my laptop, my passport, my important documents. I didn't leave a single thing behind. By the time Laura got home, I had everything ready to leave. And by the time she stood at the altar, waiting for me, I'd be somewhere far, far away. The Dallas Arboretum had never looked better. Rows of white chairs lined the garden, facing a floral archway overlooking White Rock Lake. The place was packed, 200 guests, all dressed in their finest, fanning themselves under the Texas sun. A live string quartet played softly in the background, and waiters moved through the crowd with trays of champagne flutes. Everything was perfect. Everything except for one thing. The groom wasn't there. Laura stood at the front, glowing in a custom Vera Wang gown. Her hair was styled in soft waves, her makeup flawless. She had spent the last 12 months planning this moment down to the smallest detail, the flowers, the menu, the seating chart. Every piece of it had to be perfect. But as the minutes ticked by, something wasn't right. Guests shifted uncomfortably. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Her father, William Whitmore, checked his watch. Her mother, Margaret, tightened her grip on a champagne glass, whispering something to one of Laura's bridesmaids. The priest, standing at the altar, cleared his throat. Do we know how much longer the groom will be? Laura gave a strained smile, though her fingers tightened around her bouquet. He'll be here, she said. Just running late. She was wrong. Because I wasn't coming. At exactly 4:15 p.m., the music changed. Everyone turned, expecting to see me walking down the aisle. But instead, it was Tommy, my 7-year-old nephew. He walked carefully, just like he had practiced, but instead of carrying a ring pillow, he held something else, a small silver platter with a single white envelope resting on top. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Confused glances were exchanged. Laura frowned, looking down at Tommy as he approached the priest and held up the platter. The priest hesitated, glancing around before carefully picking up the envelope. His brows furrowed as he unfolded the note inside. Silence. Then he cleared his throat and began to read. Laura, I know everything. Enjoy the wedding. I won't be there. The words hung in the air like a bomb. Gasps. A collective shudder through the guests. A murmur of voices, sharp and frantic. Laura's face drained of color. She swayed slightly, her fingers trembling around her bouquet. For the first time in her life, Laura Whitmore had lost control of the situation. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Then, her knees buckled, and she collapsed. Right there, in front of 200 horrified guests. The bridesmaids rushed forward. Her mother screamed. The priest stepped back, his hand still holding the note like it was something radioactive. Chaos erupted. Margaret Whitmore turned to my brother Matt, her voice shaking. "Where is he? Where's Jake?" Matt just shook his head. "Gone." And he was right. Because by the time Laura hit the floor, I was already at DFW Airport, boarding a flight to Denver. The plane smelled like stale air and cologne. I slid into my window seat, resting my head against the cool glass. I had nothing with me but a duffel bag, my phone, and a one-way ticket. I turned off my phone before we even took off. No messages. No calls. No explanations. I was gone. And Laura was never going to see me again. I landed in Denver just before sunset. As I stepped off the plane, I felt the weight in my chest start to loosen, not completely, but enough to breathe again. The air was different here, crisp and cool, carrying the scent of pine and distant rain. It was nothing like the heavy, humid air of Dallas. I rented a car, a silver Chevy Malibu, and drove south toward Colorado Springs. It was a 2-hour drive down I-25, but I didn't mind. The Rocky Mountains stretched out on my right, snow-capped peaks towering in the distance. It was the first time in a long time that I felt like I was heading towards something instead of running away from it. By the time I reached Colorado Springs, the sky had turned a deep purple, city lights flickering against the foothills. I checked into a motel off Academy Boulevard, grabbed a burger from a place called Drifters, and sat alone in my room, staring at the ceiling. No phone calls. No texts. No one knew where I was. And that was exactly how I wanted it. The next morning, I started over. I walked into Rocky Mountain Developments, a mid-sized construction firm known for its work on commercial builds across Colorado. The kind of company that valued skill over resumes. The owner, Mike Darnell, was an old-school construction guy, gray beard, calloused hands, wore the same Carhartt jacket every day. He looked me up and down when I walked into his office, then leaned back in his chair. "You ever built anything in the mountains?" he asked. "No, sir. Spent most of my time in Texas. High-rises, stadiums, office parks." He nodded, chewing the end of a toothpick. "Different game up here. Snow loads, wind loads, soil shifts. Not like building on flat land." I learned fast. Mike studied me for a long moment, then pulled a clipboard from his desk. "Got a project up in Boulder. Mixed-use development. Need a guy who can manage schedules and keep contractors from killing each other. Pays $75 a year. Take it or leave it." I took it. And just like that, I had a job. I spent the next year keeping my life quiet. I bought a small house on the west side of town, tucked near the foothills. It wasn't much, 2 bedrooms, a garage, a deck that overlooked the mountains, but it was mine. I traded in my F-150 Raptor for a Toyota Tacoma. No need for something flashy. I stayed off social media, kept my head down, worked hard. If anyone asked why I left Texas, I told them I wanted a change of scenery. No one pushed for more details. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking over my shoulder. Then I met Emily Parker. It was on the Boulder project, about 6 months after I started. She was a structural engineer, one of the best I'd ever worked with. Smart, sharp, knew her stuff. The first time I saw her, she was standing on a job site in a hard hat and steel-toe boots, arguing with a subcontractor about load-bearing walls. "You can't just add an extra cutout for plumbing," she said, hands on her hips. "You compromise the structure, the whole thing's useless." The plumber rolled his eyes. "I've been doing this 20 years, lady." Emily didn't blink. "And I have a master's degree in structural engineering. So unless you've personally rewritten gravity, we're doing it my way." I remember smirking, thinking, she's got fire. After the plumber stormed off, I walked over. "You made a new friend," I said. She sighed. "Men get real touchy when you tell them they don't know everything." "Yeah," I said, "we do." She smirked. "Glad you admit it, Turner." I raised an eyebrow. "You know my name?" I read site reports. Unlike some people. And just like that, she had my attention. Emily was different from Laura in every way. Where Laura was polished, Emily was practical. Where Laura cared about appearances, Emily cared about getting things done. She didn't play games. She didn't care about money or status. She just was who she was, and that was something I hadn't realized I needed. We started getting coffee after meetings, then lunch. Then one day, she invited me to go hiking. I don't hike, I told her. You live in Colorado now, she said. You hike. So I bought some Merrell boots, a backpack, and followed her up Red Rock Canyon open space. By the time we reached the top, I was out of breath, sweating through my shirt. Emily just grinned. See? That wasn't so bad. I laughed. I hate you. No, you don't. She was right. We started dating. No fancy dates. No elaborate plans. Just easy, simple time together, grabbing tacos from a food truck, watching movies on her couch, making fun of terrible reality shows. It was the most effortless relationship I'd ever had. No pressure. No expectations. No second guessing. And 1 year later, I put a ring on her finger. Small wedding. No churches, no big speeches, no ridiculous guest lists. Just us, standing in a field outside of Manitou Springs, saying the only words that mattered. For the first time in a long time, I was happy. For a long time, I thought I had outrun her. A new city, a new job, a new life. I had done everything right. No social media, no contact with mutual friends, no traceable connections to my old life in Dallas. I had disappeared. But Laura? She wasn't the kind of woman who let things go. I should have known she'd come looking. At first, I didn't hear a thing. 4 months after the wedding disaster, I was waiting for some kind of fallout. Angry messages, emails, maybe even someone showing up at my door. Nothing. I figured she was too embarrassed to face it. That she'd picked up the pieces and moved on, just like I had. Then, about 6 months into my new life in Colorado Springs, I got a call from my brother, Matt. You're not gonna believe this, he said, voice tight with something between amusement and frustration. I leaned back in my chair, staring out the window at Pikes Peak. Try me. Laura's dragging your name through the mud, telling everyone you left her at the altar because you were cheating on her. I almost laughed. That's rich. Oh, it gets better, Matt said. She hired a lawyer. Patrick Delacroix. That name made me sit up a little straighter. Delacroix was one of the best civil litigation attorneys in Dallas. The kind of guy who didn't take cases unless they came with 6-figure retainer fees. And the fact that Laura had hired him? That meant one thing. She wanted revenge. I did my research. Delacroix wasn't just an expensive lawyer. He was a scorched earth kind of guy. The type that didn't just want to win. He wanted to bury his opponents so deep they could never crawl back out. And that's exactly what Laura was paying him to do. She started small. First, she filed a defamation lawsuit, claiming that my note had irreparably damaged her reputation. That she had suffered emotional distress from the humiliation I had caused. That her career had been affected, her friendships ruined, her entire life derailed because of what I did. The lawsuit was laughable. Texas was a one-party consent state, meaning I could have released every single piece of evidence of her cheating, and it still wouldn't have been illegal. But this wasn't about winning. This was about dragging me back into her orbit. Then came the rumors. She told people I had been abusive, that I had isolated her, that I had emotionally manipulated her, that she had been so terrified of me that she never dared to break off the engagement, even when she knew it was wrong. It was all a performance, carefully curated to make her the victim. Some people believed her. Some didn't. But it didn't matter, because I wasn't there to defend myself. And that drove her crazy. The lawsuit never got off the ground. For one, she had no case. For another, she couldn't find me. I had no listed address, no social media, no digital footprint. I had buried myself so deep in Colorado Springs that even a high-powered Dallas lawyer couldn't dig me up. At one point, she even tried going after Matt, pressuring him to tell her where I was. You think I told her? Matt had laughed when he called to tell me. I let her waste an hour of my life, then sent her in circles. She had money, she had resources, and she had hatred fueling her. But she had no way to reach me, and that only made her angrier. Then, one day she found me. It was a Thursday in October, about 2 years after I had left Dallas. I was grabbing coffee at a place called Gold Camp Roasters in downtown Colorado Springs. A little hole-in-the-wall spot, always smelled like fresh espresso and cinnamon. I was standing in line, waiting for my black coffee and breakfast burrito, scrolling through work emails. I didn't see her at first, not until I heard someone say, in that familiar sharp voice, well, look who finally stopped running. I turned around. And there she was, Laura Whitmore, standing 3 feet away from me, holding a Chanel handbag, wearing a fitted wool coat and designer heels that did not belong in Colorado. For a second, I just stared at her. I wasn't shocked that she had found me. I was shocked that she still cared enough to try. Her face was the same, but something was different. The confidence, the smugness, it was still there. But now there was something else beneath it. Desperation. Like she had spent 2 years chasing a ghost, and now that she had finally caught up, she wasn't sure what to do with it. I took a slow sip of my coffee. Laura. Her lips pressed together. That's all you have to say? I glanced at the barista, who was watching us with thinly veiled curiosity. Not really the place for a conversation, is it? Laura let out a sharp laugh. Oh, I think we have plenty to talk about, Jake. I sighed, setting my coffee down. Fine, I said. Then let's talk. And I walked out the door, not to run, not to escape, but to finally end this once and for all. I didn't invite her in. I didn't have to. Laura Whitmore had never waited for permission in her life, and she wasn't about to start now. She stepped past me into my house, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood floor, bringing a scent of expensive perfume and Texas heat with her. I shut the door behind her, calm, steady. She expected something different. She expected to find me alone. She expected to find a man who had run away from his problems and had nothing to show for it. Instead, she found a man who had moved on. Her eyes flicked over the place, the open floor plan, the stone fireplace, the framed wedding photos on the mantel. One in particular caught her attention. A picture of me and Emily, taken on our wedding day in Manitou Springs. Simple. No big white dress. Just the two of us, standing in a field with the mountains in the background. Laura's face paled. You're married? I smiled. Yeah. She blinked, as if the word itself didn't make sense. Her mouth opened, then shut. I could see the gears turning, the way she was trying to rework the story in her head, trying to figure out how this didn't fit into the narrative she had built about me. Finally, she let out a small, disbelieving laugh. That was fast. Not really, I said. Been a couple of years. She ran a manicured hand through her hair, trying to regain control. Well, I guess I shouldn't be surprised. You were always impulsive. I raised an eyebrow. Impulsive? She crossed her arms, tilting her chin up slightly. Jake, let's not pretend you handled things like an adult. You left me at the altar. I exhaled slowly, shaking my head. No, Laura. You threw everything away the moment you decided a wedding ring didn't mean anything. Her expression darkened. I just wanted to enjoy a little freedom before the wedding. It didn't mean anything. I stared at her, waiting. She sighed, flipping her hair over her shoulder. Besides, she added, I haven't legally cheated on you. That did it. I let out a short, humorless laugh, then turned and walked toward the kitchen. She hesitated, then followed, heels still clicking like she was walking into a boardroom. I grabbed a ceramic mug from the cabinet and poured a fresh cup of coffee from the stainless steel drip machine sitting on the counter. No rush, no tension in my body, because I had already won. Laura leaned against the counter, watching me. You humiliated me, she whispered, voice sharp. I took a slow sip of my coffee. Did I? Her jaw tightened. You ruined my life, Jake. Do you know how hard it was to fix everything after you ran off? Do you know how many questions I had to answer? How many people I had to convince that I wasn't some abandoned bride? I set my mug down. Did you tell them about Ethan Carter? Her mouth snapped shut. I nodded. Didn't think so. She shook her head, exhaling sharply through her nose. I don't even know why I'm here. I thought. She stopped herself, looking away. I tilted my head slightly. What? You thought I'd still be miserable? Still lost? That I'd be sitting in some bar, drinking my problems away? She didn't answer. And that's when I knew. Laura hadn't come here for closure. She hadn't come here to apologize. She had come here to win. She had spent 2 years chasing my ghost, hiring lawyers, spreading lies, trying to make sure I suffered for what I did to her. And now, standing in my kitchen, looking at my wife's coffee mug on the counter, at the framed photos on the wall, at the life I had rebuilt without her, she finally realized that she lost. And she couldn't stand it. I walked past her and pulled open a desk drawer in the living room. Inside was a manila folder. The same one Callahan had given me back in Texas. The one I had kept, not out of bitterness, but because I always knew this day would come. I grabbed it and turned back to Laura, holding it up. Take a good look, I said. I tossed it onto the coffee table. The folder slid across the smooth surface, stopping just in front of her. Laura's fingers twitched. She hesitated, then slowly picked it up and flipped it open. Her face turned pale. Inside photos. Timestamped. Laura and Ethan Carter at the Capitol Grill. Laura checking into a hotel in uptown Dallas. Laura and Ethan in the parking lot, standing way too close. 4 months worth of proof. She flipped through them in silence, her breathing unsteady. Then she looked up at me, her green eyes colder than I had ever seen them. You kept these? Of course. Her lip curled slightly. Why? I shrugged. Because I knew you'd try this eventually. A long silence stretched between us. She swallowed hard, shutting the folder, running a shaky hand through her hair. You think this makes you better than me? She asked quietly. I shook my head. No, Laura. It just makes me smarter than you. She held my gaze for a long time. Then, finally, she stood up, grabbing her Chanel bag from the counter. Without another word, she walked to the door. She paused with her hand on the doorknob, like she wanted to say something. But whatever it was, she swallowed it down. Then she opened the door, stepped outside, and closed it behind her. I stood there for a moment, listening to the sound of her heels fade away down the driveway. Then I walked back to the kitchen, grabbed my coffee, and sat down at the table. No tension. No anger. Just peace. Laura Whitmore was gone. And I never saw her again. Share your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Laura actually loved Jake? Or was he just part of her perfect life plan? If you liked the story, subscribe to the channel and give us a like.